the numbers increased by about 50% over the last year or so, probably because our profile is so much higher than it was before, with our existence and our role being advertised in virtually all issues of every member publication. They're also based on the community roundtables that we've started. We've held now probably 10 of them. They've been somewhat delayed by or suspended by the work involved in responding to the Finkelstein inquiry and other things, but we've held roundtables in 4 states, and that will continue with both media and community organisations to identify what they see as problems with media standards and what could be done about it. Some of the problems that come up in that we also gather from journalists as well. Journalists tend to speak more freely, of course, one-to-one than they do in broader discussions about what they see as problems within the media. The problems include distortion and suppression of key facts and opinions, confusion of fact and opinion, errors of fact, especially online due to excessive haste in posting material, and inadequate corrections of those errors, invasion of privacy, particularly through the use of photographs taken from a distance. Some problems, of course, in any profession or industry are inevitable, and I don't think it should be a surprise that there are some, but the level is higher than it should be, and I think it's a significant problem that needs to be addressed. On the other hand, we need to bear in mind that it is true, I think, that the media and journalists in particular, many of them, if they're to be effective and if they're to serve the broader public interest in access to information and free expression of opinion, do need to be from time to time somewhat aggressive, somewhat unruly, and one shouldn't seek perfection in this area. Indeed, if we did seek perfection, it would be at a very high price. But having said that, I think there is a substantial problem that needs to be addressed, and I might say that it has an adverse impact, amongst other things, on freedom of expression. If people are to have freedom of expression, they need access to reliable information. If they're fed false information, then the views that they form and that they might want to express will not be the views that they would form if they were and express if they were well informed. So access to unreliable, distorted information is an attack on freedom of expression. Similarly, if they're unable to get their voice heard reasonably, because particular outlets or perhaps a general tendency may be to be more willing to publish views from one part of a perspective on a particular issue rather than another, that infringes on the freedom of expression of those people who don't come from the part that's going to be more generously covered. If they're given an occasional example to express their views, but that's overwhelmed by a very extensive coverage of the other view, then again their freedom of expression suffers. Freedom of expression needs to be for all people, not just for those who are wealthy or for those who have special access to the most widely available or most widely read media. And of course it's also a huge infringement on freedom of expression if people are intimidated by vitriol or by other forms of excessive abuse. That again, even if it comes from active proponents of freedom of speech, is in fact an attack on freedom of speech. So media standards, good media standards, are an essential element for a number of reasons, and one of them is in fact genuine, wide-ranging freedom of expression. Now the Press Council has a very important role in this, a very demanding role. We can never do it to my satisfaction anyway, and there are many issues which one shouldn't look to the Press Council to solve anyway. There are other aspects of society and of democracy which must address them. We must always, I think, have realistic expectations of a Press Council. But we need to do a lot better. That's one reason why I agreed when I was approached to chair the Council, why I agreed. If I thought the Council had been going fine, I wouldn't have gone there. I thought it did need to be improved. And with the support from a range of different interests, we have started to improve it. We improved it to some extent before the phone hacking and the Finkelstein inquiry, and we've improved it further since then, though many of the improvements are really just ready to go. For example, the funding boost that we got is leading to 2 new staff. Now, they started yesterday. They're getting neglected, I'm afraid, in their induction at the moment. So there's been a long lead time in getting these things sorted out. I want to just mention quickly some of the progress, because I have felt that there perhaps isn't from various quarters in the room, there hasn't been really much, if any, up-to-date understanding of what the Council is doing. Firstly, we've expanded substantially to online-only publishers. That's very important. Almost all of our complaints involve online. because even if they were read in print version, we deal with online as well and with corrections online. We now have our adjudication processes now are much more independent than in the past. We've now got a situation where there are virtually no people who are employed by publishers on our adjudications, and the majority, as has always been the case, are public members. We are having meetings for adjudications more frequently. We don't, contrary to some of what was said earlier, we don't require people to travel. Indeed, we encourage them not to travel, really. We can do these things by teleconference in most cases. We are certainly not legalistic. The suggestion earlier of cross-examination is an extraordinary. If it happened in the past, it certainly doesn't happen now. The discussions are around the table and they're all on first-name terms. We are developing a new suite of specific standards. For example, the first is to do with suicide, the next is to do with access to patients. We'll have ones on photographs taken from public property onto private land. We'll have some on a very important issue, which is ensuring that people who are going to be the subject of a story are given a fair opportunity to comment before the matter is published at all, including online. The advent of online publishing, of course, has led to a tendency for people to say, well, I'll get up one side first and I'll tidy it up later. Indeed, but in fact, the need for accuracy and fairness, first up, is increased by online publishing, not reduced. We're undertaking, we've already got agreement that the publishers will all provide us with internal statistics. I noticed earlier the IMC apparently will not be providing internal statistics. All our publishers will be providing their own statistics, so their own internal complaints handling in the same form as we do, just as we are. So quite a lot of progress has been made. But we're still moving too slowly in our handling of complaints. We're suffering from sustained misrepresentation of our adjudications and other comments from some quarters, sometimes from proponents of freedom of speech, who are alleging quite falsely that some of our adjudications have inhibited on freedom of speech, or by falsely presenting what we've said and implying that we have put inhibitions on freedom of speech, they themselves are inhibiting freedom of speech. So we are still suffering, I think, from still not a high enough level of cooperation from publishers in some areas, and we need to keep working on that. But we are making progress. I want to just finish with two important strengthenings that I think we need to achieve and then comment very briefly on the bill. The first strengthening is, as Mr Finkelstein asked of me at the inquiry, but at the time I said perhaps we should do it another way, I think we now definitely need to be able to institute our own investigations without waiting for a complaint. There are far too many instances, and we've had one where we have it in chapter and verse, that even a very strong-minded, almost pugnacious public figure has declined to bring his complaint to us because he believes that it will only make the situation worse, that he will be discriminated against more fiercely by the newspaper in question. This is a view expressed to us frequently. No. And we really need, I think, to be able to take these things on board without waiting. I've seen some very bad abuses in the last few weeks where we've had no complaint, and yet I know, in fact, the people were concerned about it but thought it would just make it worse if we complain. So I think we need to have the ability to initiate our own investigations, but also, in order to ensure that the strengthening that we've undertaken is firstly taken through to its fruition because it's mid-path, secondly entrenched, not subject to subsequent withdrawal or erosion, and thirdly, that if need be, we strengthen ourselves further without having to wait for a Finkelstein inquiry. I believe we should have an independent review of our activities every 3 years by an independent panel. They should firstly report just specifically on our compliance with particular benchmarks. We put benchmarks to the Convergence Review, which are designed at ensuring adequate independence, for example, and adequate complaints handling procedures, like the right to bring complaints directly to the council rather than via the publisher, which is a crucial right, absolutely crucial right, that you're entitled to come to us directly rather than through the publisher. Those things need, I think, to be reported on every 3 years, that we are complying with them. These are specific objective benchmarks. A report then on more subjective evaluations as to how well we're doing in certain areas, not something that tells us what to do or can direct us what to do, but brings to the court of public opinion an independent analysis of how well we're going. So I think that's very important to build on what we've done and ensure that we keep getting better.